Find a formula for Sn, the geometric series 3 plus 3 over 2 plus ... and find the value of n if Sn is equal to 381 over 64. So the first thing we have to do is to identify what A and R is. So A being the first term, well, that's pretty simple. A is just going to be 3. It's the first term that we see. A equals 3. And R is the common ratio. So we're going to take the second term and divide it by the first term. So 3 over 2 divided by 3 is the same thing as 3 over 2 multiplied by a third, which will give us a half. So the common ratio is a half. So once we have A and R, we can use our formula from our formula book. Sn equals A multiplied by 1 minus R to the power of n divided by 1 minus R. So we're swapping the A for 3 and we're swapping R for a half in the numerator and the denominator. So a half to the power of n is just going to be 1 over 2 to the power of n. Because technically it's 1 to the power of n over 2 to the power of n, but 1 to the power of n is just going to be 1. No matter what you'd sub in for the n, it would always just be 1. So you end up with 1 over 2n. And then 1 minus a half is just going to be a half. So what we're going to do is multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2, because we want to get rid of the fraction in our denominator. So multiplying by 2 over 2 is technically the same thing as multiplying by 1, so it doesn't change the actual value of the fraction. So multiplying by 2 over 2 to get rid of a half in the denominator. So 3 multiplied by 2 is 6, and that's still multiplied by 1 minus 1 over 2 to the power of n, and a half multiplied by 2 is the same thing as a half multiplied by 2 over 1, and that will give us 2 over 2, which would be 1. So a half multiplied by 2 is a half multiplied by its reciprocal, so that's always going to end up giving us 1. So this over 1 will just end up being the same thing, so it's going to be 6 times 1 minus 1 over 2 to the power of n. So 3 by 2 is 6. 3 by 2 is 6. So now we have a formula for Sn for this geometric series, and this is our formula. So part 2, we want to find the value of n if Sn is equal to 381 over 64. So Sn we found to be this, so we let it be equal to 381 over 64. And then we just have to solve for n. So we're going to start off by getting rid of this 6 that's stuck onto the front of the bracket. So we're going to divide both sides by 6. So dividing by 6 on the left just gets rid of that 6, so we just bring this down on the left hand side. And 381 over 64 divided by 6 is 127 over 128. So now we just want to solve for n, so we want to get all our numbers without n on the left of the equal sign and any term containing an n on the right. So 127 over 128 comes over the equal sign to become minus 127 over 128. And minus 1 over 2 to the power of n goes over the equal sign to become 1 over 2 to the power of n. 1 minus 127 over 128 is 1 over 128, and that's equal to 1 over 2 to the power of n. So we can let 2 to the power of n equal to 128, just let our denominators equal, because they both have a numerator of 1. So technically what happened there was we cross multiplied. So 1 times 2 to the power of n is 2 to the power of n, and 1 times 128 is 128. So we have 2 to the power of n equals 128, which is the same thing as log base 2 128, which is equal to 7. So 2 to the power of what gives us 128? Well, if we input into the calculator log base 2 128, it gives us 7. So 2 to the power of 7 equals 128. So our n equals 7. So the value of n, if Sn is 381 over 64, is 7.